Behind me is the intersection of Lott Street, Bear Street, and Tirali Street in Toronto. Wait, what? They don't exist anymore? Now, many of you will recognize this as Queen and Bay, but those names are new-ish. This section of Queen Street was originally called Lott Street until it was renamed in honor of Queen Victoria. Why Lott Street? Well, it used to be essentially the northern extent of the city. Everything north of here was just land that was divided into lots that were out in the boonies. Bay Street has a more complicated history, as it was stitched together from a number of streets. The section south of here was originally called Bear Street, but it was renamed Bay Street to reflect the fact that it ran down to the lakeshore at the harbor, or bay. At that time, the lakeshore was just on the other side of Front Street. Over the years, we've extended the lakeshore farther south, and we've extended Bay Street along with it. I did a video on Toronto's moving shoreline. I'll put a magic link up here, and I'll put one down in the description so you can find it when you finish watching this video. The section north of Queen Street was originally Tirali Street. It was renamed Bay Street just over a century ago as part of the project of connecting all these streets together to make one street. And the jog in the intersection here is a clue that they were not originally the same street. Now, let's look a little bit north to continue the story. There's another jog in Bay Street near College Street, and for the same reason. That was the north end of Tirali Street. The alignment of Bay Street north of there was built from a handful of small streets that were not all lined up with each other. I've put together a map here showing the original names of those streets. Now, sources don't all agree on the exact placements and boundaries of those streets, so I've done what I can. Putting all of this together to form Bay Street involved some realignment of streets since they didn't line up. It also required filling in a gap immediately north of Bloor Street. Almost all of this was done in 1922 to create Bay Street as we know it today. The one remaining bit was north of Scholar Street, which retained the name Ketchum Avenue until 1924. Speaking of streets with jogs in them, I'm here at Richmond Street and Jarvis Street. Here's a map of the area, and yes, those jogs are there for the same reason. Richmond and Adelaide both used to end at Jarvis. That street behind me used to be Duchess, and the street on the other side of Adelaide used to be Duke. The names Duchess and Duke disappeared during the project to create the Don Valley Parkway when these intersections were realigned and the names Richmond and Adelaide continued on east of here. The realignment included Richmond and Adelaide joining and crossing over the Don River to join with Eastern Avenue. Eastern Avenue was also realigned for the DVP project. I mentioned that in my video on the Lower Don. I'll put links in the usual places. And we're just about a block south at Adelaide and Jarvis. Speaking of streets that have been renamed, Adelaide used to be called Newgate. Lombard Street, which runs between Adelaide and Richmond, parallel to them, was formerly called Stanley Street, and before that, it was March Street. There are lots of streets in Toronto that have been renamed over the years, and quite a few that have been joined together from a number of individual streets. If you've ever looked at a map and wondered why the course of Dundas Street is so wacky, that's part of the reason. Now, we'd be here all day if we tried to go over a list of all of them, so let's not do that. Instead, I want to take you off somewhere else and show you a different kind of disappearance. And here we are at Woodbine Racetrack near the lakeshore. Wait, what? The racetrack's gone? I guess that's why it doesn't smell like manure here. Woodbine Racetrack was built in 1874 at the foot of Woodbine Avenue. At times over the years, it also operated under the name Greenwood Racetrack, and it continued to operate under that name after the new Woodbine Racetrack was built in the 1950s in North Etobicoke. This racetrack closed in 1994, and as you can see on the map, the western section is now largely Woodbine Park, while the eastern section is a residential development. Some of the street names in the residential section refer back to the history of the racetrack, including the street immediately to my left here, which is Northern Dancer Boulevard. And that curve you see along the southeastern side of the residential development, it's not a coincidence that that's the shape of the curve of the racetrack. This is not the only racetrack to have disappeared in Toronto over the years. Much of Thorncliffe Park, including an area with the street now called Milepost Place, used to be the Thorncliffe Park Racetrack. The site of Dufferin Mall was formerly the Dufferin Racetrack, and there's another racetrack that has disappeared in Long Branch. And now here I am in Grand Opera Lane in the Yonge and Adelaide area. You may be able to read Grand Opera Lane on the street sign up there. Behind me is an office building. Behind the camera is the Scotia Plaza office complex. The Grand Opera House, after which the lane was named, disappeared almost a century ago, but that's not the disappearance I want to talk about. I want to go back a few years. The Grand Opera House was one of a number of theaters owned by Ambrose Small in the early 1900s. On the 1st of December 1919, he sold them all for a profit of $1.7 million. That's over $25 million in today's money. The following day, in his office in the Grand Opera House, Small met with his lawyer, and then Ambrose Small disappeared.
Now, he'd been known to disappear before. It turned out he had a secret room in the theater where he would, meet with women. And he also had a habit of traveling without telling anyone, whether for business or, pleasure. So his wife and his lawyer didn't even report him missing until the following month. He was officially declared dead in 1924. The case was closed in 1960, still unsolved. There had been leads of various levels of credibility, but none of them panned out. His body has never been found. The Grand Opera House met its end when it was demolished in 1927. And now, I'm going to disappear. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe.